Why does it arise again? Why does it arise again? I think it is the will to live. Because of the will to live, the moment consciousness dies out, it is come into life again because of the will to live. That's why you see the chain of dependent origination, avijja, paccaya, sankhara, ignorance conditions volition, and volition conditions consciousness, right? So this volition is the will to live. The will to live conditions consciousness to spring into life. And then it dies out in a short moment. And then because of the will to live, it arises again. So dependent origination can be considered like the traditional interpretation, 3 lives or 2 lives, but it can be considered right here and now, in this very life, moment to moment. You can consider in that way. And then this Venerable Molya Paguna asks, Venerable Sir, who makes contact? And the Buddha said, not a valid question. I do not say one makes contact. If I should say one makes contact, in that case, this would be a valid question. Venerable Sir, who makes contact? But I do not speak thus. Since I do not speak thus, if one should ask me, Venerable Sir, with what as condition does contact come to be? This would be a valid question. To this, the valid answer is, with the 6 sense bases as condition, contact comes to be. With contact as condition, feeling. And stop here for a moment. So here you see, contact means contact at the 6 sense doors. So in order that you can that contact can arise, of course you must have the 6 sense doors. That means you must have the 6 sense bases. And once there is contact at the 6 sense bases, then feeling arises. Venerable Sir, who feels? Not a valid question, the Blessed One replied. I do not say one feels. If I should say one feels, in that case, this would be a valid question. Venerable Sir, who feels? But I do not speak thus. Since I do not speak thus, if one should ask me, Venerable Sir, with what as condition does feeling come to be? This would be a valid question. To this, the valid answer is, with contact as condition, feeling comes to be. With feeling as condition, craving. So we stop here for a moment. So, as we mentioned before, if you have pleasurable feeling, then craving arises. Venerable Sir, who craves? Not a valid question, the Blessed One replied. I do not say one craves. If I should say one craves, in that case, this would be a valid question. Venerable Sir, who craves? But I do not speak thus. Since I do not speak thus, if one should ask me, Venerable Sir, with what as condition does craving come to be? This would be a valid question. To this, the valid answer is, with feeling as condition, craving comes to be. With craving as condition, clinging. With clinging as condition, existence or being, etc., etc. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But Paguna, with the remainderless fading away and cessation of the 6 sense of the 6 bases for contact, comes cessation of contact. With the cessation of contact, cessation of feeling. With the cessation of feeling, cessation of craving. With the cessation of craving, cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of being. With the cessation of being, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. That's the end of the sutta. So here, this sutta, the Buddha says, there is no being. This is what the Buddha implies. So because of that, you cannot say who consumes, or who feels, or who makes contact, etc. So it's just that these conditions just arise naturally. It's just the perception of a being is just a perception in our mind. Now we come to the 15 Sutta in this Nidana Samyutta at Savatthi. Then the Venerable Kachana Gota approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said to him, Venerable Sir, it is said, right view, right view. In what way, Venerable Sir, is there right view? And the Buddha said, this world, Kachana, for the most part, depends upon the duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. Let's stop here for a moment. This in India at that time, most people either believe in the idea of existence or the idea of non-existence. This is another word for it, is a notion of existence. That means perpetual existence. That means eternalism view. That means when you die, you will continue to exist. And it's the same person who dies and is reborn. That is one extreme view. The other extreme view is non-existence. It's the annihilationist view. That once a person dies, there is no more rebirth. There is no more existence. So these two views the Buddha does not accept because it assumes or presumes that a self exists. That a self exists. So they argue whether after death that self continues to exist or the self does not continue to exist. But in the Buddhist teaching, this self is just a concept in our mind that nature has planted in our mind to make us strive to fight for survival. And then the Buddha continued. But for one who sees the origin of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, there is no notion of non-existence in regard to the world. And for one who sees the cessation of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, there is no notion of existence in regard to the world. This world, Kachana, is for the most part shackled by engagement, clinging and adherence. But this one with right view does not become engaged and cling through that engagement and clinging mental standpoint, adherence, underlying tendency. He does not take a stand about myself. He has no perplexity or doubt that what arises is only suffering arising. What ceases is only suffering ceasing. His knowledge about this is independent of others. It is in this way, Kachana, that there is right view. All exists, Kachana, this is one extreme. All does not exist, this is the second extreme. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle. With ignorance as condition, volition comes to be. With volition as condition, consciousness, etc., etc. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance, comes cessation of volition. With the cessation of volition, cessation of consciousness, etc., etc. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. So the Buddha says that the Buddha's way of seeing is not whether a self exists after death or not, but everything is due to conditions. This world, everything in this world is conditionally arisen, dependently arisen, dependent on conditions. 12.16 at Savatthi. Then a certain monk approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said, Venerable Sir, it is said, a speaker on the Dhamma, a speaker on the Dhamma. In what way, Venerable Sir, is one a speaker on the Dhamma? Monk, if one teaches the Dhamma for the purpose of revulsion towards aging and death, for its fading away and cessation, one is fit to be called a monk who is a speaker on the Dhamma. If one is practicing for the purpose of revulsion towards aging and death, for its fading away and cessation, one is fit to be called a monk who is practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. If through revulsion towards aging and death, through its fading away and cessation, one is liberated by non-clinging, one is fit to be called a monk who has attained Nibbana in this very life. Monk, if one teaches the Dhamma for the purpose of revulsion towards birth, for the purpose of revulsion towards ignorance, for its fading away and cessation, one is fit to be called a monk who is a speaker on the Dhamma. If one is practicing for the purpose of revulsion towards ignorance, for its fading away and cessation, one is fit to be called a monk who is practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. If through revulsion towards ignorance, through its fading away and cessation, one is liberated by non-clinging, one is fit to be called a monk who has attained Nibbana in this very life. It's the end of the sutta. So here the Buddha is saying the speaker of the Dhamma should be one who teaches with the purpose of revulsion towards aging and death, to make people see that we should have revulsion towards birth, aging and death. 12.17. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. Then in the morning, the Blessed One dressed and taking bowl and robe, entered Rajagaha for alms. The naked ascetic saw the Blessed One coming in the distance. Having seen him, he approached the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When they had concluded their greetings and cordial talk, he stood to one side and said to him, "We would like to ask Master Gotama about a certain point, if he would grant us the favor of answering our question." I'll stop here for a moment. You see, the Buddha was going on alms round, and as the Buddha was going on alms round, this naked ascetic came and wanted to ask a question. So the Buddha said, "This is not the right time for a question, Kassapa. We have entered among the houses." The second time and the third time, the naked ascetic said to the Blessed One, "We would like to ask Master Gotama about a certain point, if he would grant us the favor of answering our question." "This is not the right time for a question, Kassapa. We have entered among the houses." Then the naked ascetic Kassapa said to the Blessed One, "We do not wish to ask Master Gotama much." Then the Buddha said, "Then ask what you want, Kassapa." "How is it, Master Gotama? Is suffering created by oneself?" "Not so, Kassapa," the Blessed One said. "Then, Master Gotama, is suffering created by another?" "Not so, Kassapa," the Blessed One said. "How is it then, Master Gotama? Is suffering created both by oneself and by another?" "Not so, Kassapa," the Blessed One said. "Then, Master Gotama, has suffering arisen fortuitously, being created neither by oneself nor by another?" "Not so, Kassapa," the Blessed One said. "How is it then, Master Gotama? Is there no suffering?" "It is not that there is no suffering, Kassapa. There is suffering." "Then is it that Master Gotama does not know and see suffering?" "It is not that I do not know and see suffering, Kassapa. I know suffering, I see suffering." Let's stop here for a moment. So you see this naked ascetic, he said he's not going to ask much, but he's asking a lot. Then finally he said, "Whether you are asked, how is it, Master Gotama, is suffering created by oneself, or is it created by another, or is it created by both, or is it created by neither? In each case you say, 'Not so, Kassapa.' When you are asked, 'How is it then, Master Gotama, is there no suffering?' you say, 'It is not that there is no suffering, Kassapa, there is suffering.' When asked, 'Then is it that Master Gotama does not know and see suffering?' you say, 'It is not that I do not know and see suffering, Kassapa. I know suffering, I see suffering.' Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One explain suffering to me. Let the Blessed One teach me about suffering." And the Buddha said, Kasapa,